I'm Dr. Meridith Dohse, and you've just tuned in to A Dose of Hope. With me today is, what's your name again?
Craig Dohse. I'm your better half. Oops, did I say that out loud?
And it is such an honor to come into your homes today. So, having said that, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about emotions that nurture. It's a kind of a simple topic, and you'll probably be going along with us and say, yeah, I know that. But it's good to remind ourselves sometimes and to have a little bit of a discussion. So where you are there on the television, you go ahead and have a discussion with us. So we're going to talk about emotions that nurture. We want to make some of that hope come back into people's lives.
That's your idea of nurture?
I think so.
You know, I think anytime we talk about emotions, period, that you get a whole gamut of just everything. Because there's high emotions, there's low emotions, there's the ones that make you feel good, the ones that make you just want to say, oh, I can't stand that person. There's just such a wide range. So having said that, let's get started.
I'm just curious, what are high emotions and low emotions?
What? You don't know what that is?
I don't know what that means.
High emotions are when you're on a high, you just feel so good and they make you feel good about the whole world, like, you know, the world is a great place. And then the lower ones are when something sad happens or you go through a difficult situation. That brings your emotions, you know, down, almost to the point of sadness.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk about things that'll kind of build those up then, make them high emotions. And they're not, again, secrets and per se, but one is love. Love, you know, we all need to be loved, but the best way to get some love is to give some love. We all love our families generally. Yeah. But,
you know, one thing though, when you talk about love, so many of us confuse that with affection or with, I hate to say it, but sex. You know, a lot of people feel like, and even domestic violence, you know, they feel like, oh, if you love me, you know, love shouldn't hurt. But how many people hurt because they think the person loves them? If somebody tells you, oh, if I can't have you, nobody will, you think that's so sweet, you know, oh, this person loves me, you know, but that's not it. It's that person is trying to control you. So that's not love.
You're right. That would be more control. You know, another thing about love, though, now what we're taught a lot of times, the television and movies and all that stuff, it's all the emotional stuff, and you like that, of course you do. You know, even the sexual love, but that's not real love that lasts and builds a person. That's the kind that can. It's as easy as it comes. It's as easy to go. You know, so you have to have. In building a relationship, you have to have the ability to decide to love, to actually make a conscious decision, because there are times that
when that person is not lovable.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so we may be in the middle of a big disagreement, but we never stop loving each other because it's what we've decided to do. We're going to be committed to one another, and committed to a relationship or someone is, it actually, though, enhances your very being.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed about when we do counseling is when things are great, then everybody, oh, I love him so much. He's my rock. He's my soulmate. And then when you get that MasterCard bill or Visa or American Express and you see where it's more money than what you have, then it's a situation. Why did you buy this? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Then you start blaming, you know, start bringing up things that happened 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Like it's all your fault that we're in debt, you know, that whole sort of thing. So it's always good to be friends before you get married, you know. That way, when the tough times come, that love overshadows everything else.
Yeah, that's true. You know, and I'd like to take this in a direction too, that, you know, we're in a world that is so divisive right now, and so many mean things are said to other people. The social media, it makes you bold in how you talk and how you put things out there. It really does no good, because if you would take an attitude of love or a decision of love, what you find is that it will actually break down many barriers. It's I did my research. That's what this paper is. But it actually it can take on almost any negative emotion. You know, you're surprised sometimes if you're you know maybe you've been in a store and someone's been a little bit testy, and you start to treat them with respect instead of getting into an
Verbal
argument or a
altercation,
verbal
yes.
altercation with them. And it's amazing, 9 times out of 10, that's going to melt that situation. And, I've had it happen where when we've left the store or wherever it was, we actually were laughing, because we broke that down. But it takes an intentional move on somebody's part. And it's not going to happen just by, and that's one of the things about the love that's just the emotion. I think, well, it just happens. We fell in love. What is that, really? Okay, yes, you have this stirring, but now we're going to another level with this. It builds lives.
And then when you think about it, what does it cost you to be nice to people?
Good point.
If the Bible tells us we're supposed to love one another, that's one of the things that Jesus told us to do, to love your neighbor. Well, then he turned around and said, well, who is your neighbor? Who is my mother? Who is my brother? It's like we're all in this big melting pot together, and we are supposed to love one another. Yeah. And if you love somebody, well, let me back up. It's kind of hard to love somebody when you've never been shown love.
No, that's
and I
true.
think that's what's wrong with the world now, that a lot of people just feel defeated because they don't feel loved, and they don't know how to tell a person how to love them.
Well, and then sometimes people feel funny, who and what are you to be caring about me? They almost are defensive of taking that in. And yet, some kind of, call it anything you wanted to, but it call it kindness, or, being generous, being humble before other people. That conveys a warmth and something that draws goodness and positive vibes to you, and gives them to the other person as well.
But see, the H word is very difficult. That's along the lines of the V word, being vulnerable too. It's like men want to be macho. They don't want to cry, even if somebody dies or something like that. They don't want to do that. They want to be, oh, I'm the man. I'm in control all the time. And there's nothing wrong with being sad sometime, or saying, I don't know what to do.
Right. And there's nothing wrong in reaching out to someone else with human kindness and trying to build this world in which we live is full of all kinds of evil and terrible acts of violence and so forth. And then we're told how prejudiced we are against one another. And yet, I always find that when I meet somebody, all that stuff that has been told to me about being prejudiced, it's not there if I try to be kind and caring. Well, we've got to take a little break. Our time is up in this first segment. We'll be back in just a few moments. You're watching
A Dose of Hope.
Welcome back. This is A Dose of Hope. We're talking about things that nurture life and living, that add to our existence. We're talking about love. That's kind of a broad topic, but it's one that we all experience and we hope to grow in, because it's one of those things that can melt any kind of a negative thing and make it something positive. So how about, I did my research, like I said, another thing that emotion that nurtures is appreciation and gratitude. Appreciation and gratitude. If you maintain an attitude of having grateful feelings and stuff, look at all that you have. You might be poor, you might be something that's less than rich, but yet, if you look at, and I love history, if you look at the history of all of the world, you find out that we live in a time that even our poorest people in this country live better than kings did, 200 years ago. It's just an incredible thing. We have so many blessings, material and otherwise. And I'm talking about some of the otherwise, the emotions, to be grateful for life and what has been given to us.
When you were talking about appreciation, I was thinking about when the hurricane came through, or when a tropical storm, even when it was raining the other day, when the flood waters come, and then you start to appreciate where you live, or the fact that, oh, it didn't flood this time, or are we going to be okay? Those kind of things kind of come into pass. Or when you're diagnosed with something and you get better. That's a big turning point.
Yeah, that is. I was impressed coming out of Hurricane Harvey. I saw some of the people that had gone through that, and they'd been devastated. Their homes had been flooded. They literally had lost everything. Their cars were flooded. And I thought what one man said to his spouse was, but we're still here. And so when we're still here, you still got a possibility. You know, I remember I grew up in the Midwest, and there was a neighbor that had a tornado go through their property and just wrecked out their farm and all this kind of stuff. And after it was all over, the man of the family was walking through his property, and one of his kids was just beside himself. Look, we've lost everything. And the dad said, well, okay, but I tell you that we are going to rebuild. And that's one of the things that a resilient spirit helps you so much. And you can have that if you appreciate what you have left, so to speak. And in fact, they did, and they were more successful in rebuilding than they had been with what they had before. That's always the possibility. Being a Christian, I always remember what St. Paul said. I paraphrase. He said, it's true, we get knocked down, we get beat up, we get everything, but we get up and we keep going. Why? Because we appreciate what we've been given.
Right. I have heard people say that the definition of a failure is people who don't get back up.
Yeah.
Or people who don't try anything. You know, oh, I can't do that. I'm afraid. You know, what if I fail? What if I'm not good at it?
Yeah.
But what if you don't?
Yeah.
You know, it's like get back up and keep chugging away and make something happen.
Yeah, that's the truth. You know, when you're dealing with all kinds of situations in life, business, relationships, whatever, sometimes you have to remember what's the worst thing that can happen. And there's the old cliche, failure is never final.
And it's never an option. It's like, why would you fail?
Yeah. Yeah, right here in Houston, we always say that failure is not an option. And that's been a byline really for us in this community. So we just keep going, and we're appreciative of what we have. It has a power. That appreciation has a power, and you feel better yourself. If you're appreciative about things and you can see what you're thankful for, it lifts your spirits.
But you know, speaking of lifting spirits, how many people feel like they've done so many things that God cannot forgive them for?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to lift your spirits up when you feel like you're condemned.
Yeah.
Like, oh, God won't forgive me. You know, I was a drug addict, or I was a prostitute, or, you know, my parents didn't love me, and you just can't get past that.
Right.
But a lot of times, especially in my culture, we don't believe in going to a lot of counseling. We're the kind of people who think, okay, get over it, you know, it'll get better, you'll be fine. Oh, girl, you know, that happens to everybody, you know, for somebody that's been molested. And it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't just go away. You have to get healing before you can move on. Otherwise, you're reliving it over and over and over again. And that's what's so unfortunate. That's one of the things that I like about doing counseling, because you get to tell people, until you close your eyes on this side and you wake up on the other side, there's room for change. There's room to make a difference. There's room for healing. And that's something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, that's the truth, yeah. And so many times I think that there's kind of a popular feeling, again, that if you've had these devastating things in your life, maybe domestic abuse, or, you know, your father left you and you didn't have him in your home, or you know, something just went totally wrong, you went bankrupt or something like that. It's easy to just stop at that point and say, well, this is the end, but it's not the end. You know, if you can kind of see what you're really appreciative for, yet you can say, well, I can keep going. And that's what is one of the things this country and also people of faith have, is that you can change. Things can change. Things can get better.
That's one of the things about being in Texas. You know, you could say, well, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes and it's going to change.
Right.
Because the weather changed so much, so quickly. I mean, that's just like anything else in life. Things may be gloomy tonight, but in the morning, it's a whole new day. How many times have we talked to people, it's like, oh, they hate me, oh, this is wrong, oh, that's wrong, it's never going to get better. And then next day, something happens and everything is in their favor.
Yeah.
That's the goodness of God. You know, people talk about, oh, God is good all the time. Okay, but you need to have a relationship. Anybody can say a cliche.
Right. You know, sometimes we get stuck at a certain point and we just think that we can't move past that. I've also found in life that about every 2 years there's a major change. So that's how I say, what's coming, just not quite here yet.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break, and you're watching A Dose of Hope. We'll see you in a minute.
Okay, we're ready to start again, and we're going to talk a little bit more about emotions that nurture us, that build us up. And I've got a good one for this little segment here.
Uh-oh.
How about curiosity? Curiosity. What do you think of when I say that?
Curiosity?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I've never heard that word before. What does that mean? Please tell me.
That was not what I had in mind. Curiosity, you're curious about things. People that are curious about life and living have a better attitude, and there have been some studies that say they live longer too. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm always curious about historical things. Some people think that's boring, but that's okay. There's so much in this world to be curious about. Maybe you like gardening, so you're curious how do these things grow, and how can I get, just something that takes you into another realm of existence.
One of the things that I think about seriously when you say that is, if today looks like yesterday and the day before, then you're not showing any growth. So you need to tap into that, because the world is such a big place and there's so many things that we can find out about it. I'm not a big fan of history, and we all know that. But because our history, while we may have a lot of people who accomplish great things, there's a lot more that happened to my ancestors that was not favorable. That there's no way you could spin it. There's no way that it was, a great thing. And even a child growing up in the 60s, things wasn't great then, when we couldn't go in restaurants, we couldn't sit here and sit there. So, I'm not a real big fan of tapping into what happened then. I am a fan of people who overcame those odds and made a difference, and went on and fought back and stood up for themselves, and stood up for, African Americans. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah.
But, and I admire people that could overcome the odds, because, I mean, look how many people were killed because they just said, I'm not going to take this, or don't talk to me like that. And the dogs were sick on them and everything.
Yeah.
So no, I no.
And yet, when you said that, I read an article this week about Frederick Douglass. I don't know a lot about him. I know that he was very active during the pre-Civil War, and then for the last part of the 19th century, But he had been born a slave, and he had seen all the things you just described. But he had within himself that he was not going to live that kind of life. And eventually he escaped to freedom then, and he intended to do that, to get away, to get out of that. And he became a spokesman for all African Americans. And he was adamant about his opinions and views, but he was such a strong-willed individual. He just always stood for himself. And I was interested, one of the things he did, which he talked about, he was a strong Christian, but he took on Christianity as the major culture was utilizing it at that time, and said that's not really what Christianity is about. I mean, he said it much better than, more eloquently than I just did. But that's fascinating to me, and that always gives someone like me a hope, and that comes out of curiosity, because I'm more curious about him. I want to read more about him. I want to know him better, and then let his influence have a positive influence on me.
That's admirable.
Nah.
I mean, it is, because how many people can say that? Most of them, when Black History Month comes around, they're like, ugh.
Yeah.
Or Black Lives Matter, they're like, oh, those people. So, and it's not even about that. It's that when you look at percentage-wise, I mean, who was hung on the tree? Who was boiled? Who was beaten?
Yeah.
And those kind of things are still going on. And there's nothing funny about that. When people do things like that in the workplace and they want to hang a noose, and that's funny. How is that funny?
It's not.
It's not. It's really not.
If most of us are honest about our past, though, too, and it's sometimes you just have to go back further to experience that in our own ancestry. But people like me, for instance, most of us were serfs, And if you know anything about that through the Middle Ages and late Middle Ages, that's really the same thing as a slave. You were a slave to whoever was running your estate. You were a slave to them in terms of producing whatever your land could produce. If you got some leftovers of that, and to be whipped or anything, there was no justice for someone like us. It's just that in different periods of time, it was the experience, and that doesn't take away from the African American experience. I would never want to do that. We should learn and grow way past that. Mm-hmm. But many of my own people were in the same boat at one time. So, it's not great to think about that, but it is that curiosity about it will take you and.
Yeah, I venture to say that there is a difference. I mean, your people may have, been enslaved per se, but they were not hung just because of how they looked, or, if you happen to look at a white woman, then you're dead, or you're sent to prison for a crime you did not commit and you never come out. So that's a little different, but I'm venturing off topic. I just, kind of threw that in. One day we are going to talk about a situation like that and talk about anger and generational curses. And I mean, there's so many topics that I want to tap into that I know we can have good dialogue about. But we're going to run out of time, so we can't touch it. Oh, we have again.
We just haven't. So we're going to say goodbye for today. You've been watching A Dose of Hope. This is Meridith Dohse. I'm Craig Dohse. It's been good being with you, and we'll see you next time.